Good morning. My name is Rosalind Elemy. I'm a clinical dietitian at Eisenhower Medical Center. And today I'm going to talk about what's on food labels. There's a wealth of information available on labels, and we're going to kind of explore the information that you can obtain from food labels. So we'll go ahead and get started. The presentation I'm providing today was actually developed by the University of Nebraska, their extension services, and they have excellent slide presentations. So we'll be going through the slides today. So on all food labels, there's five key components of a food label. The first is that the product has to tell you what it is. So in this particular label, we see it's tomato soup. The other item that's required is that they have to tell you how much the content weighs or the numerical count of the ingredients in the food package. There's also has to be an ingredient statement. So they have to list the ingredients included in the food product. Another requirement is that they have to give the name and place of business of the company that produces the food products. And finally, the component which we'll review further is nutrition facts. That gives you the nutrition information that's available to make good choices when you're buying processed foods. So first, kind of the review of the statement identity. It does describe the product. So here we see very generic ones: tomato soup, cereal, yogurt. And that is a requirement. You want to know what's in your food product. They can use additional names to identify the product, but in that product, it should be available what actually is included in the package. So this is kind of an example. We can see that there's a statement, and probably you can recognize what the actual brand name of those products are, but the generic name for the products are cream cheese and granola bars. So you can see that provides the statement of identity for those particular food products. Okay, the other item that is required on food labels is a statement of the weight content of the food product. So it can either be the weight, the volume, or the numerical count of the food product. The weight statement has to be in the bottom third of a food label, actually the bottom 30% of a food label. So you always want to look at the bottom of the food label to find out the actual content of the foods by weight. It is required that the content is listed both in English and metric units. Okay, so in this product, you just kind of look along. You can look, again, you want to look at the bottom of the label. You can see the net weight is 15 ounces. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back, 15 ounces. And then it's also listed in grams, which is 425 grams. So the third item that has to be included on a food label is a statement of the ingredients. And the ingredients are listed below the nutrition facts label. The key component of the ingredient list is that it's listed by weight. So the food item that is present in the food at the highest weight level is listed first and goes in descending order. So in this food product, we can see it's a cereal, and the first ingredient is whole wheat, followed by brown sugar and molasses. So that would mean that whole wheat is the most, it has the highest component as far as weight is concerned. So this is just an example, kind of looking at some additional listings for cereal. So kind of looking at the slide, we want to look at the label that has sugar as the most prominent component in the food item. And we can see, I'm sorry, the middle slide has the most content of sugar. And it lists a lot of other ingredients that are probably helpful for us, like whole grain corn flour, whole oat flour, but by volume, it's mostly sugar. Another component of food labels is that they have to list any allergies or allergens in the food product. There are there's 8 allergens that must be identified on food labels. Those 8 allergens account for about 90% of all the allergic reactions related to food. They've identified over 160 different allergens in food, but these are the 8 that cause most of the issues with food allergies. And you can see on the slide, those allergies that must be listed on food labels are eggs, milk, wheat, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. With the final 3, the tree nuts, fish, and shellfish, they have to list what type of nut it is, what type of fish, or what type of shellfish is included in the food product. And there's been a 9th allergen that has been identified that has been an issue for people. And starting next year in 2023, January 1st, they also have to list sesame as the 9th allergen. And that came about because there are quite a few people that do have sesame allergies. And if you're having something like a hamburger bun with sesame seeds, you obviously would know the sesame seeds are there. But sesame is also hidden in a lot of food ingredients. It may not be listed as sesame, and things like cereals, protein bars, hummus are examples where you would typically see sesame as an ingredient in a food product. So there's 2 ways they can list allergens on food labels. So the first one, they would list the allergen followed by parenthesis indicating the allergen that's present in the food product. The second way of listing the food allergy is that they can do a contained statement. So they would list the allergy following the ingredients, listing the allergens that are present in the food product. So it's up to the manufacturer. They can choose either way to list their food, or they can do both. So you can see on this slide, they have a list of allergens. The first one, you can see lists wheat in parentheses, it lists egg in parentheses, and it lists milk in allergy in parentheses also. There's also a bottom statement saying it may contain pecans. And again, the tree nut is identified in this food label. Often the food allergens may occur in food products incidentally. Sometimes they're manufactured in the same factory. They may be produced on the same product line, and those foods are introduced accidentally into the food product. The second example shows how they're listing the food allergies with a contained statement. So again, both labels, you're able to identify that it does contain wheat, egg, and milk, and possibly may contain pecans in the allergies section. Okay. Now, they also have to include a statement of the product and the place of business. So you can see in the slide, they list the manufacturer. They're located in Iowa, and it lists the zip code. And that's satisfactory if the company has a public listing. If it's not publicly listing, they have to provide a complete address. And again, that's voluntary. If they want to provide more information and more complete address, they can do on a label if they're publicly listed. But again, if they're not, they have to list their complete contact information. Now, another requirement on labels, they have to show the if the food is imported, they have to list the company that it was imported from. And that requirement is not actually a requirement from the Food and Drug Administration. It's actually required by US Customs and Border Protection. So on the next slide, you can see that you would think the product actually is wild-caught Pacific cod. So Alaska, it's from the US. But if you look further on the label, you can see it's actually a product of China. And that's the case. From my reading, there's a lot of fish that may be caught in the US or South America, but a lot of it's processed in China. So it has to be listed as a product of China for that reason. So the final information on the food label, which we're going to focus on, is the nutrition facts label. As of last year, 2021, food manufacturers had to do a revision of their food labels, and there's some key changes that were made with the new food labels, including emphasizing the nutrition, the serving size, the calories provided, and the number of servings in a food product. Other changes related to total fat. They used to list the calories provided from fats, but now they just list the total fat. The fat, and the reason they did that, because they, based on the dietary guidelines, their emphasis now is more on the type of fat consumed versus the calories provided from fat. A new addition to the new labels also is that they now list added sugars, and that was a big change based on the dietary guidelines that found that Americans are consuming too much added fats in their diet, added sugars, I'm sorry. There's also a change in the nutrient content. They used to require the listings of vitamin A and C. Those are no longer required to be listed on labels because they found that generally Americans are consuming those nutrients in adequate quantities. They did add on foods that they found, nutrients they found that are not adequately consumed in American diets, and that is vitamin D and potassium. So those are included in the new nutrition facts labels. So as you can see, the new labels kind of make it much bolder type of the serving size and calories and the servings per containers. Those changes were made because they wanted to emphasize the amount of calories people are consuming because there is such a high rate of obesity in this country. So that was just to make people more aware of the amount of calories that they're consuming. There was an update on the daily values, some changes for sodium. There was a slight decrease in the amount of sodium that was recommended each day. It used to be 2,400 and now it's 2,300 milligrams per day, which is essentially 1 teaspoon of sodium. And again, as far as there's also the change in nutrients required. So they're continuing calcium and iron as the nutrients that must be listed, but vitamin D and potassium are now included. So why did they make the changes? The serving sizes are based on what the serving sizes people actually make. They actually do a survey, and there were some changes that were pretty evident that we were not realistic based on what people were actually consuming. Added sugars were also listed, again, because they did do, from nutrition surveys, found that Americans are consuming too much added sugars in their diet. And the intake of excess sugar in the diet has been associated with chronic disease conditions like diabetes, some forms of cancer, and even heart disease. And the nutrients that they found that tend to be lacking in American diets were also highlighted on nutrition facts labels now. And these are all based on the updated dietary guidelines. So some of the changes, they changed what was considered a single serving size. This example is for ice cream. Previously, the serving size for an ice cream was considered a half cup. Well, in reality, most people were eating a lot more than that as a serving size. And so for the new nutrition labels, instead of a pint of ice cream providing 4 servings, it now provides 3 servings. They up the serving size of ice cream. It's now more of 2/3 of a cup versus a half cup. And again, they're not saying this is what you should eat, but they just wanted the labels to reflect more, be more reflective of what people actually consume. They also have the option of providing not only the typical serving size of 2/3 of a cup, but also the amount of calories provided in the whole container. So there are people that actually would sit down and eat a pint of ice cream. And so they'll get the servings for 2/3 of a cup as well as the whole pint of ice cream. So people get a more realistic information on the foods that they're actually consuming. They also have single serving depending on the package. So if you get a 12-ounce bottle of soda, it will list the calories provided for the whole bottle. But some people may get larger bottles, like a 20-ounce bottle of soda or juice, and they'll list the servings for that single bottle also, assuming that people are choosing those and actually consuming the entire container. So kind of going over some items, you may see nutrient content claims on food labels. A lot of these claims actually have legal definitions, and we're going to kind of review some of the legal definitions from the FDA, the USDA, on what those labels mean. So when you're reading food labels, you can see the actual definition for those labels. So on this instance, they're putting reduced fat mayonnaise. There is actually a legal definition for that. And we're going to just on the next few slides kind of review what the legal definitions are for those food claims. So an example of items that are, say that they're calorie or reduced in fat, the legal definition, something is considered calorie-free if it provides less than 5 calories per serving. Reduced calorie, if you find that on a food label, will refer to foods that have 25% less calories than the original version of a food product. So that might be an example. Let's say you're buying something like cookies or ice cream. If it has the ingredients modified and they have 25% less fewer calories, they can legally put on their labels that it provides reduced calories. The legal definition for low calories are food items that provide less than 40 calories per serving. Fat-free also has a legal definition, and those are foods that have less than 0.5 grams of fat per serving. So yes, something that has fat can actually be labeled as fat-free based on the legal definition. Reduced fats are going to be foods that provide less than 25% of fat compared to a regular version. So in the instance of the previous slide where we saw the reduced fat mayonnaise, it means that that mayonnaise product has 25 calories than the full fat version of mayonnaise. A food is considered low fat if it has less than 3 grams of fat per serving. So those again are legally defined by the USDA, and the food product has to meet those definitions for them to be legally presented on a food label. So additional food items that, nutrition contents that can be claimed on food labels related to sugar and sodium. A product is considered sugar-free if there's less than 5 calories per serving. So you may see that on things like sugar-free sodas, some things like sugar-free gelatin, some salad dressings may contain the items that are considered sugar-free. And again, they're going to provide less than 5 calories per serving. Those things can be of interest for people that are trying to watch their carbohydrates in the diet, for people who are trying to manage diabetes. Generally, items that are considered sugar-free are not going to have a major effect on blood sugar control for people who are trying to manage their diabetes. Items that are listed as reduced sugar have less than 25% less sugar than the regular version of a food product. So that is, again, legally defined. Now, no added sugar. And again, I mentioned previously that Americans are consuming too much added sugar in their diet. The legal definition for no added sugar is that no sugar is added during processing or packing. They also include foods that contain natural sugars like juice and dried fruits. Those food products, though, if they're just on their own as a food product, don't have to list it as added sugar because it occurs naturally. But if they're used as an additional ingredient in another food product, it has to be listed as added sugar. Sodium-free is on nutrition labels will indicate that there's less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. Reduced sodium, again, provides less than 25% less sodium than the regular version of a food product. So it's not sodium-free, but again, has a reduced amount compared to the regular food product. Food items are considered low sodium if they have less than 100 milligrams, 140 milligrams of sodium per serving. And a food product can be labeled light. Either serving is okay if they have 1/3 fewer calories, or if it has 50% less fat than the regular version of the food product. Okay, so some additional nutrient content claims. Foods are considered to be an excellent source or high or rich in a nutrient if they provide 20% or more of the daily value of a nutrient in our diets. The daily values, however, are based on 2,000 calories per day. And the calorie needs for an individual will vary depending on your size, your age, your sex, but generally they use 2,000 calories per day as a reference, and the daily values are based on those references of a 2,000 calorie diet. Good sources of nutrients are indicated on the food label if they provide anywhere from 10 to 19% of the daily value of the nutrient. They can also include more enriched or fortified if addition of the nutrient provides more than 10% of the daily value. So as of 2014, the USDA also issued guidance on the labeling of gluten-free on food products. So the words that manufacturers can use are gluten-free, they can use without gluten, free of gluten, or no gluten. Those foods cannot contain wheat, rye, barley, or any crossbreeds of those grains. Kind of a caveat of that label term, though, is they can also add that to foods that never contain gluten to begin with. So things like fruit can be labeled gluten-free, even though they never contain gluten to begin with. So it's up to the manufacturer. If they want to include that on their food product, they can. But again, they have to make sure that the food does not contain wheat, rye, or barley. Healthy is another term that has been identified, that's legally defined, and it can be foods that are not necessarily low in fat, but they have a profile that provides mostly mono or polyunsaturated fats, so they're more healthy fats in the diet. Healthy can also pertain to foods that provide at least 10% of the daily value of potassium and vitamin D. And again, those are foods that have been identified that tend to be lacking in American diets. Another term that you may see on food labels that currently has no definition, though, is natural. So you may see it on a food product, but from a government standpoint, there's not a legal definition for that label. So kind of examples, you can see on the first one, it says all natural apple vinegar. But again, there's no legal definition for natural. The next product is gluten-free. And again, the product may or may not be considered a source of gluten to begin with. So it's up to the manufacturer if they want to include that title on their food labels. The hard healthy again is legally defined, which means that it does fit the profile where the fats provided are primarily from polyunsaturated and unsaturated fats. So again, sodium-free is something that's legally defined versus natural, which again, there's not a government definition of natural on a food label. So finally, what food manufacturers can include on their food labels are health claims. Health claims describe a relationship between a food or a supplement and a reduced risk of specific disease or health condition. The health claims are based on extensive research, and there's a consensus that there is an association between the food and reduction of a specific disease or health condition. So again, there has to be a significant scientific agreement to be considered an authorized health claim on food labels. So some examples of authorized health claims that are found on food labels are found in this slide. So one involves sodium and the reduced risk of high blood pressure. Another one involves healthy diets providing adequate folate to reduce the risk of brain and spinal cord birth defects that can be included on products. That's often found on things like enriched breads that contain additional folate to help reduce the risk of any spinal cord defects. Another authorized health claim involves cancer, and that health claims includes eating diets that are low in fat, high in fruits and vegetables, low in fat, and foods that may contain vitamin A, vitamin C, and dietary fiber. So an example might be something, say a package of oranges. It can say that it's low in fat and it's a good source of fiber and vitamin C. And so they can make it a claim that it may reduce the risk of developing cancer. So the second health claims that can be found on on nutrition labels are qualified health claims. So qualified health claims are supported by scientific evidence, but there's not an overwhelming or significant scientific agreement on the statements. If those are included on food labels, they have to also include a disclaimer saying that it's not as up to the same level as the standard health claims on food labels. So examples are again on the slides. We can see the first one says scientific evidence suggests but doesn't prove that adding whole grains may reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. Another example is adding specific unsaturated oil fats to the diet may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. So those are considered qualified, and they do have to include the disclaimer statement saying that it suggests but not actually proven. So in the next slide, we want to say, is this an authorized or qualified health claim? So this one is an authorized health claim, and you can see that it's an authorized because there's no disclaimer statement on the food label. So the next label, we can read it, says, while many factors affect heart disease, diets low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce the risk of this disease. So is this an authorized or a qualified health claim? So it's authorized, again, because there is no disclaimer statement on the food label. The next one, which is quite a lot to add onto a label, it says limited or non-conclusive scientific evidence suggests that eating a tablespoon and a half of canola oil daily may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. So is this a qualified health claim or authorized? In this case, it's qualified because it does have the disclaimer statement saying that it's not conclusive scientific evidence. So other statements you can find on food labels. Some that you commonly may see on food labels include no hormones added or raised without hormones. You may also see food packaging labeling that indicates GMO-free, genetically modified. So what do those mean? Well, free of hormones or hormone-free versus no hormones added or raised without hormones. Everything that has been alive, including plants, do provide hormones. So you can't say a food is hormone-free because they occur naturally, anything that has been living. You may find on packaging of pork and poultry, they may have statements saying that there are no hormones are added to their food products. but they do have to have a disclaimer because they aren't allowed to add hormones to the food products in the first place. So on those food products, they may make a claim on the food label, hormone-free or no added hormones, but again, it's kind of meaningless because hormones are not added or permitted or prohibited to be added to the food or poultry stock or feed. So another food label you'll often see is GMO. So you want to decipher when you're buying food products to see if it's worth buying foods that are GMO free. Again, some people are looking for foods that are not genetically modified, but the food manufacturers have the ability to add that to their labels, even if the foods are not GMO. Are not GMO. So in the case of bananas, they are not GMO to begin with. So whether it's on the label or not, you're not getting a genetically modified product. So currently, the genetically modified foods that are for sale in the United States are listed on the slide: corn, soybean, cotton, canola, alfalfa, sugar beets, papaya, squash, and Arctic apples are the foods that are genetically modified. The Arctic apples, they're not relatively available in California, but basically they're sliced apples that don't brown, but they're genetically modified. And I think they're available in a few more markets. But basically, any corn products, soy products generally are genetically modified. So if you're looking for those products, you want to look for ones that are not GMO if that is a concern for you. Okay. Another big issue are food labels when they'll say best by or used by. Those are not really of significance or not legally defined currently. The only instance that they are of concern, the use by date, is with infant formulas. And because of the confusion regarding the use by date or best by, a lot of people throw out foods that may still be usable. You can see about the majority of people do discard foods near the package date, at least occasionally. So the use by date is usually recommended when the food is at its peak quality. It's not a safety issue except for infant formula. So usually the date is there. So the food product is probably still safe to use. The quality may decline after that date. Another example of food labeling, and this relates to grocery stores. The sell-by date is the date that grocery stores will have to pull those foods from the display. So it's no longer available for sale in the market. And it gives best if used by indicates, again, when the best, it's more of a flavor and quality issue. It's not a purchase safety date. So there's a legislation was introduced in July 2019 on kind of standardizing the food dates on food products, Best By or BB or UB. Best By would be to designate the quality date. So the best date to use a food product before the quality of the food declines. The use by would be definitely when the food should be discarded. The bill was originally introduced in 2019 and it didn't go anywhere. It was reintroduced this year, last year in December 2021. At this point, again, it's kind of gone to committee. So there's no indication that at this point that it will actually become law, but they're hoping that they can standardize the food labeling so that consumers have a better idea of when a food is actually safe to consume versus when it's just an issue of the quantity of the food declining. Okay, so again, the only food product, which is our infant formulas, when the use by date is actually the date when that product should be discarded. So kind of moving on to food storage. A lot of times the foods will say best by or used by. Again, generally the foods may be okay, but the quality of the product may decline after those dates. Any refrigerated foods, you want to make sure you're storing them safely at below 40 degrees. For canned foods, you want to try to keep them in a cool, dry place, generally below 85 degrees Fahrenheit. For canned food products, a lot of us are relying more on canned foods during the pandemic. We kind of stocked our pantries. But a good idea is first in, first out. You want to use the foods that you purchase first. You want to use those up before using foods more recently purchased. Foods with a high acid content usually are good anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And the slide will give examples of foods that have a high acidity content. So things like tomato juice, orange juice, tomatoes, some fruits, pickled items. Generally, you want to make sure that you're using those products within 18 months. For foods that have a low acidic value, they can keep up to 5 years properly stored. So the slide does give examples of food items that you can have for longer storage in your pantry. But again, it's always a good idea to rotate your foods, make sure that you're using them up in a timely manner. So now, is it safe to consume foods that may have a dent in the can? Generally, if it's a small dent, the food is probably safe to use. It's more concern if there's a dent near the seam or the top or bottom of the can. That may mean the can has been breached and the food content may not be safe. Generally, the rule of thumb, if you're in doubt, just throw it out. Okay. I would hope no one would keep a can that long and it looks like that, where it's totally rusted. But actually, generally, if you can rub the rust off the can, it's probably safe to consume. But if it's heavily rusted, actually the can structure may have been breached and the food is not going to be safe to eat and you want to discard that food product. And again, if you find any bulging or leaking of cans, you definitely don't want to use those food products. You're at risk for botulism with those food products. Frozen foods should be stored at 0 degrees. Generally, they can be stored at a lengthy time in the freezers. However, the longer you keep foods in the freezer, the quality tends to decline. So eggs, there's a sell-by date on foods, and that usually refers to the retailers. They have to pull them from the sale within by the sell-by date. At home, usually the foods can keep up to 3 weeks beyond the expiration date listed on the food carton. And just for safety, you want to make sure that you're not storing your eggs on the refrigerator door, because that's the warmest part of the refrigerator because it's open more frequently. So you want to make sure you're storing your eggs further back in the refrigerator. So if you want to know your foods are good, the government actually does have a food site. It's an app called Food Keepers. And within that app, they have a website as well as the app. They have a listing of foods that are available, categories, and it'll tell you the best way to store the products, how long you can keep the food items safe. Also in the app, it gives information on any recent food recalls. So it's a good resource. Sometimes you'll hear something like there's a recall of lettuce, looks like every other week, but you can kind of check the app or the website and check and see if there's anything in your pantry or refrigerator that may be on the recall list. So again, it's Food Keepers, and again, it's a product of the USDA. Okay, so in conclusion, there's a lot of information that can help us make healthy food selections on food labels. So you want to be a food label reader so you can make the best choices for your diet. So these are general references. The FDA does have a food site. Again, the Food Keeper app is a good selection if you're just wanting to know more about food safety.